Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming. My name is Tanse Herman. I am the State Grazing Lands Soil Health Specialist for the United States Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Conservation Service. Alphabet soup, it's USDA NRCS. And kind of come up through the ranks of the local field office working with farmers and ranchers and addressing natural resource related concerns such as soil erosion, grazing management, infrastructure needs, and water quantity related issues, especially in our livestock dominated ag ecosystem here, and found soil health. It's a term that's relatively new, but it is a set of decision-making practices that have been around for years, and we're almost kind of circling back. And given the theme of the Smithsonian exhibit, Change in Rural America, if I got the title right, we are kind of going back to some things that we've gotten away from, courtesy of the Industrial Revolution. And hopefully we can open your eyes to some things that we can all do, whether it be a backyard gardener, a homeowner, or a farmer rancher who's making their living off of the landscape. Who are you?
Thanks, Tanse. My name's Dave Ollila. I live up here east of Newell. I work for the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition as a soil health specialist. I contract with them at the ranch east of Newell. And certainly thank you guys for asking us to be here. Appreciate it. We like to share our message anytime we can about what agriculture is, and yeah, tonight's topic of looking where agriculture has been, its past, and what it is now, and what we see the vision of the future, just not only in agriculture as producing food, but having an impact on society and our environment. And that's what we want to kind of share with you tonight, is some demonstrations about what that may look like, what it has looked like, and compare and contrast those things. We know that, like Tanse said, as mechanization and chemicals moved into agriculture, we were able to really increase our production, but there's a price to pay on that, and it's not necessarily sustainable, and it's both from an environmental point of view, but a profitability point of view. And it so happens that, like Tanse said, what's old is new again. And it's the darndest thing to discover. God's design is perfect, and we've just got to figure out what He designed, and we got to live within that system. Mm-hmm. And as you do that, there's a whole bunch of things that come with it, and it just snowballs and rolls into something that agriculturists can have a future in production agriculture, in production and profitability, besides just raising commodities. We're going to be impacting air quality and water quality and wildlife and insects and just general health of people, because we can make food healthier and more nutrient dense. And so, like I was saying earlier, if they would take those billions that they're trying to get to Mars with and put that into research into the soil, we would never have to worry about food, and we wouldn't have to worry about our environment. So what we'd like to do is tease you with some of that. We're going to show you with those statements how that works. And so, Tanse, if you want to start with your deal there. And understand, let me jump in, we're local. We're not coming and doing a magic trick.
Make some observations. Differences between my hands. And we can just talk about them too. What differences do you see? These are our soils collected from near the same place, but under very different management.
Well, that has organic matter.
Ooh, good term. What's organic matter?
Any kind of living thing that's in a decomposing state is what I think it is.
Okay, and what would organic matter probably be made up mostly of?
Probably grass or bugs or...
All true. I was thinking of the element carbon. really
Oh,
what
well,
we're.
I'm not that scientific. Aggressive.
Scientifically speaking,
Yes.
yes, that's
I'm not much of a
In its
scientist, so I just.
simplest form, yes.
it. You are correct, though. Yes.
Yeah.
I am a
matter-
scientist.
All
and you are
matter has
correct.
some degree of carbon in it, right? And
So what's your observations?
I heard you said
Well,
something
this
about
is so
pores.
porous that you
Yep.
can see holes in it.
Yep.
That looks very compacted and tight,
Mhm.
and like
Mhm.
if you ran water over it, it would just run off, and
Yep.
this would, so.
Okay. This even has a little bit of plant material in it, some residue from probably wheat or oats.
Yep.
But both hands, these are just air dried clods. There's nothing mechanical or artificial about them. They were wet, now they're dry. We just dug them out of the field just like this. So what we will do is put them in these beakers of water. It's just tap water, nothing special. The ones that were porous, that had some organic matter associated with it, are from a no-till system. Actually, they came right out of one of Dave's fields. And this one over here comes from what we would consider a conventionally managed crop field. Commodity crops raised year after year. All site preparation and weed control mechanisms are through tillage. Okay, this soil is heavily disturbed. You mentioned that it has the appearance of compaction. It just looks really, really tight, and water would probably run off of it. What happens when a tillage implement goes through the soil is much like when we put our mixing bowl together and start mixing ingredients in the kitchen. What starts as large aggregates or pieces ends up becoming very small. Soil particles, these larger soil particles get beaten down basically into almost a flour-like consistency, and we end up with something like this through significant modification and tillage. So I'm just going to stick one of each of these in this water, and we'll see what happens. So this might represent what happens when we have significant snowmelt or ponding at the bottom, at the lower edge of a field, and the soil gets completely saturated. What happens to the natural habitat for microscopic organisms, earthworms, insects, what have you? What's maybe your first observation? Okay, both of them are losing pieces of soil, but do you notice any difference in
Oh, yeah, this
how
is much faster.
Yeah, all right.
this one's losing them a little bit faster? How about the particle size?
Bigger.
Right, so we know already, just from the size of the particles coming off of this one, that we have soil aggregates that are larger chunks. Soil, all soils, regardless of where you are in the world, are made up of some proportion of sand, silt, and clay. And that is heavily driven by the parent material, the geologic bedrock that's under that soil. But these larger particles, as you see them falling down, are sand, silt, and clay basically welded together by biological glues that come from things like earthworm. You know how, if you've ever handled them, if any of you are fishermen, you know how slimy they can be. Well, when they go in and out of their tunnels, they leave a little bit of that slime behind. It serves as an agent to glue soil particles together. Not to mention that that tunnel serves as a pipeline for water to get from up on top into the soil where plants can really use it. What input do you have, Dave?
Oh, just some insights to understand. So often we talk about plants taking in carbon and giving off oxygen. And that's true, and that's where we want the carbon to go into the soil. But for all that to happen, the biology in the soil has to live. And all carbon biology needs oxygen to live with. And so we need the ability for oxygen to get into that soil. And actually in plant respiration, the opposite of photosynthesis, plants are consuming oxygen and giving off CO2. And we forget some of those pieces, but it is a well-designed system that has so many links to it. Those worms will slide those tunnels and set those tunnels so they'll be firm and won't collapse. But also there's fungi within that whole strata that what they put out between the plants putting out exudates of sugar and the fungi and the microbes working toward them. And it's the darndest thing, again, as we understand, if a plant needs a certain nutrient, they'll put out a sugar to attract a microbe to provide that nutrient. But if you till it and kill it, that plant can only get what's here.
Only within the reach of its roots.
The
Yeah.
reach of its roots. But if you make those plants and those microbes are making deals all the time, even into the winter, and we forget that. We just think, oh, it's living and it's just functioning when we till it and plant it and we harvest it and then we're done. That soil's going year round. It is unbelievable what we're learning on that. So,
And to that end, one could make a very confident statement that this soil has a whole lot more living biomass than this soil, regardless of the size of the aggregates that I'm holding. That unit by unit, there's a lot more life in this one than this one, because this one, Dave said it well, we tilled it and killed it. It's a growing medium, and that's about all. Is there life in it? Yes, but not nearly as much as this one, because this one has been nurtured, so to speak, and disturbed as little as possible in order to produce food and fiber. Now, these two soils come from a cropped field. When we get outside and look at those demonstrations, we'll incorporate native rangeland that has been undisturbed outside of grazing use above ground. But that soil has never been tilled, and we'll be able to compare these two soils to some undisturbed rangeland as well. We can leave this and let the water do what it's going to do to these aggregates and go on out there, I think.
Yeah.
Now's probably the right time.
so we're set up out front
Yep.
there, you probably see it.
And we'll preface before we start with any of the demonstrations, one, in order to get the camera moved, and two, to build upon what we've started here.
How come it's taken so long for people to realize that they've been doing it wrong?
You know, that we ask that a lot, but that is the nature of man.
We're cutting his head
Man
off.
has a hard time changing
There we go. Yep, perfect.
what things are. And you think about the history, so way thousands of years ago when they started agriculture on those plains, where a lot of them started, you know, to till the soil or loosen it wasn't as big issue as probably taking out competition and to create monocultures. And that's 30,000 years ago. And now we're just starting to understand that polycultures, which is multiple species, are better. And you don't need any chemicals, both in fertilizers and herbicides. It all goes away. And so all those expenses that a farmer has to deal with that are really overhead, and they're petroleum driven. So if you take away the diesel fuel, and take away the herbicides, you take away the fertilizer, that's over half of your input costs gone. Well, then there's an opportunity for profit. And the other thing is resilience. Then you don't always, even on the native prairie, you don't expect to have the same production every year. But you adapt to what you have. But you're always going to have something. It's not going to bust. But gosh,
We could
China-
talk for this entire time frame on just your question. You know, in American agriculture, just the average age of the typical farmer or rancher comes into play. I'm 55 years old. I'm thinking about retiring at 65. This equipment will last me 10 years. I'm not going to upgrade because it's so expensive.
And I know what I'm doing. I can repeat what I'm doing.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know
did it this
what
way.
I'm doing, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably, this is the easy excuse, the one that I just delivered to you, but Dave hit it really, really well, is that we're a pretty proud bunch. And as big a fault as that may be, we don't want to look foolish in the neighborhood. Even in rural America, we don't want to look foolish. And but fail is first attempt in learning, and it's a hard sell. And a person has to be in the right mindset and be willing to commit, because Dave and I could convince somebody this spring prior to planting that they should change the way they're doing things. If it doesn't just really boom for them this summer, they might give up and go back to the way they did.
That didn't work.
Soil didn't get degraded overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight either. We have to be pretty purposed in our decision making. So this soil is the same one that is the conventional stuff. So
This
If
is
I-
what they're doing right now.
yep, folks are out in their fields, probably tilling or planting ahead of planting. But you see there isn't much for pore space in those small aggregates. It's fairly well compacted, and it's a lot of fine material on the soil surface. And you feel free to come closer.
Yep, get close.
You might have to actually
Don't
to be
get
able
in front of
to
the
hear
camera.
these. Yeah,
Well, let me get,
because the shop vac is going to be our source of wind, so it'll get a little bit loud. So wind is going to come out the holes in the front of this box, and then we've got this contact paper over on this side that's a little bit sticky, like a fly would stick to it. And I forgot to get my wind meter out of the trailer. I think the batteries were dead anyhow.
What's your little,
What?
I thought you had some little windmills.
Look at that.
it's a little windy.
Maybe I should just take that sucker off, and then it won't. I thought that was going to be porous enough to work, but that's okay. I think as long as it's not pulling through, it'll be all right.
So a lot of these, what we're demonstrating is conservation issues. The last 2 years with it being so open and dry, we had a lot of dust in there, didn't we? And you're blowing away your topsoil, which is your most productive organic matter-based soil.
And you should come around over here and stand where I'm standing, because I can see the very small, fine stuff beginning to move.
Oh, sure, it's coming down to this end.
Yep. So first and foremost, you notice that the loose residue is being captured on that end, and you can see the very fine soil particles starting to capture on that white plate. Now, does the wind blow the same velocity all the time? What about
say it
the
does.
other day? It was light, and then it was heavy. And then it was light, and then it was heavy. Just wind gusts. Well, I'm going to turn it off for just a moment. Does a farmer stop farming just because the wind's blowing? No, actually they don't. In fact, they might have waited for a windy day so that the soil would dry a little bit. So, let's say I'm the farmer, I made a good decision. I went out and tilled on a calm day, but the next day, here comes the wind. Okay? And that's very shallow tillage, but we'll see what happens now. So you can see those very small particles moving around, and if we really pushed it, the weeds are coming. I'm gonna farm again. Now look what happens. Now, I missed an opportunity with my wind meter for all of you to know that I wasn't pulling your leg, but I have checked this at maximum velocity, which I ran it up to. It's only about 12 miles per hour. That is
That's
not
about
very
what we
much
got.
wind.
That's about what we got
I was
right
gonna
now.
say, that's about what we got right now.
Yeah.
Goodness.
And that from an 18, 20-inch long field. What happens when we're talking thousands of acres? And because of the large equipment of today, which is a wonderful thing because fewer people can do the work of many, but we have impacts that are more significant as well when things aren't going as well. in the case of wind erosion at least. So that's a soil that's already degraded and doesn't have any residue protection from the previous crop. It was tilled under or baled up and hauled away or something like that. You don't have roots in that soil holding it in place.
Nothing on top holding it down either.
Then,
Right.
you know, even if you remember, in the 70s, they encouraged people to do summer fallow. And that's what you would do. Because if you left it bare and like that, then you would catch, you're supposed to hold more moisture. Just the opposite.
Turns out that's not correct.
Right.
But there's still places in the U.S. that do that,
Yeah.
and they know better.
We have some out on Alkali Road, right here. It's still occurring.
They're not looking at the long run, they're not looking at the future.
Well, that may be part of the equation. Dave, I think, hit on a couple other reasons why. I know what I'm doing here. And it's not like it's a crop failure. You know, they do still generally raise a crop under that situation. It's just that it may be at the expense of the resource or opportunity cost in that they could have been much more profitable over the long run. But you know, there's a lot of factors at play. Social among them. So we will move over to the rainfall simulator. Now, the thing that I failed to mention while we were standing over by that table was the words in the graphics on the table skirt itself. 5 principles of soil health, or if you don't like the term health, you could say soil function. 1.
And we've got a nice handbook. You won't have to write all this. We've got a nice handbook that explains every one of those principles.
Yep. So we have here, you know, the conventionally managed soil. Here we have that same no-till soil with minimal disturbance. Yes, there is some disturbance for the planting operation, but outside of that, it's left untouched other than harvest and maybe some grazing activities.
Would that be like a field where you would maybe harvest the wheat and leave the straw in the field?
Yes.
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 Yep. And
I-
then
yeah.
no tillage prior to planting the next crop either.
Just plant on top.
I have not tilled those soils since 2000.
Just, wow.
We just plant into them. We graze them, put feed out on them.
To be fair, and we'll describe why this might be important later, but me digging this up and sticking it in a barrel and letting it become air dry is a disturbance, yes. And one disturbance isn't necessarily the end of the world. It's just when it's repeated year over year over year that it becomes an issue. Next to that one in the middle is what's mature cover crop. I had planted that, I think it was last May in that tray, and I have it under grow lights indoors.
Explain cover crops.
A cover crop is, and this is a mixture, it's a polyculture, like Dave mentioned that term earlier, of plants that are just meant to cover the soil, and if you look over on the table skirt again, keep a living root in the soil for as many days of the year as possible. So in my indoor growing environment, we don't have frost, so I had living roots up until maturity, and even we still have some green here on this red clover as well as on this oats.
So after that's combined, the very day or next day, we're planting that into
The cover crop.
Yep.
living, go right away. The sooner the better.
Yep. What happens when you don't plant that cover crop, Dave? What grows?
Well, weeds are going to be an opportunity, right? But and I've done it where I've made the outside rounds and then didn't do that. The soil just shut down. And then right next to them, like combine and planted, and a quarter-inch of rain, and it comes. It's all quarter inch.
And so your cover crop is clover, is that what it is?
It's a mix. Ours is actually, depends, it can be winter wheat, the oats, but we use a lot of warp seed plants too. Tanse will probably touch on some of that as well.
So
Yep.
how do you get to choose though? What keeps that from being weeds?
Well,
Instead of-
competition.
Yeah.
But see, the polyculture, your native range has tall grasses, short grasses, warm season grasses, cool season grasses, of which is about 80% of the whole range. Then you have legumes, which are broadleaves that put nitrogen in the soil. Then you have just the regular broadleaf plants that are non-legumes, what we call forbs. And you have some woodies in there. They all get along. They share.
Yeah.
That's-
Right next to that cover crop tray, here's native rangeland. There's no weeds. Now, this one down here, I did get a dandelion. It's native range as well. These were taken about 30 feet apart, just on a slightly different soil. This one at my feet is a cool season dominated. This is western wheatgrass, which, fun fact, that's the state grass of South Dakota and about 6 or 7 other states, as I'm told. Very important for livestock production, and it does well in a semi-arid environment, climate like we have. It's a rhizomatous grass, which means that it reproduces equally or even more readily by new buds on horizontal roots, rhizomes. They shoot sideways under the soil surface, pop a bud, and here comes a new plant. It reproduces that way probably more readily than by seed. It just replicates itself. And through grazing management, we can even cause it to grow more shoots if we time it right, the right duration and the right amount of recovery.
With the dandelion there. Okay, I'm looking here, I'm understanding how the grass grows because that happens in my yard and it comes up in my flower bed because it goes under my roots. But with the dandelion, does the dandelion have to reseed itself or does that plant come back the next time around?
It's a perennial.
It is, yep.
So it lives more than 1 year. It does not have to reseed itself. And they're deep tap rooted.
Oh,
And,
significant.
and they are hard to get rid of. No. But you can outcompete them to where they're a non-factor. But the thing to think about with taproot, if they're a taproot, that benefits you.
I was gonna say, you don't try to get rid of it.
Well, you want to keep it in control, but you can outcompete it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of my yard, not my pasture.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but even in your yard, they're there because that grass needs something. And they're bringing all these nutrients and minerals from deep in the soil that the grass has consumed up top.
Well, I
And that's
developed,
what alfalfa does and all those deep taproot plants. And then when you kill it, all that taproot becomes food. It becomes a wick of water holding capacity in that soil. So you can look at it as evil or you can look at it as opportunity.
I'm learning to coexist because, you know, they need to bloom because they're the first flowers for the pollinators.
Yeah. Right.
But I don't need them to spread.
Right.
So that when they go puffing, when there are just a few of them, I pick them before they
Boy, if you
blow
can,
out.
yeah.
But then if they get ahead of me, I take the vacuum out and I just suck them.
Oh, how about that?
There you go.
That's a new one on me. I like that.
And we're
Good use
getting
for a
along much
vacuum.
better now. They're not taking over like they were. They're not going away, but
But
they're not taking over
it
like
is
they were.
telling you something about your soil. It's there for a reason because it can exist.
But I'd like to kill a few of them.
Yeah.
And the thing that it could be as simple as, you know, when we have, just like I'm standing on, we have a monoculture of Kentucky bluegrass or whatever you have planted in your yard. That's not how God designed these diverse landscapes. Here we have a warm season grass with cool season grass. Here's a broadleaf. There's a couple different species of broadleaf in there. It's not uncommon for an acre of healthy native rangeland to have over 100 species growing there.
So if you have like a non-native to this country kind of a weed thing that's coming up on your place, and I mean, is there a point where you have to spray it? Because I have this stuff, I don't remember what the name of it is, but it looks like sage, but it grows about that tall, and the root is probably about that long in the soil. And I've left that pasture, you know, without grazing, and that stuff is still there. I mean, is there a point where you have to?
question is, would that be wormwood?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the
Absence
exception.
wormwood?
Yeah.
That's a bad one.
Yeah.
Yes, you could control it, you can spray it down. Sheep will graze it to the ground. So there's an opportunity. Goats and sheep will eat that like there's no tomorrow.
And then is it because of that root? You just
Well,
have to
it's
have
probably always going to be there, but again, what is that root doing for you? You know, for the rest of the plants around it. But you can, there's nothing wrong with resetting, as I call it, going out and spraying that. But you know, some of it's not practical on a huge land. It's a little,
I don't
Okay.
have like
yeah. But you
Tens
certainly,
of acres,
yeah,
but-
you certainly want to get an handle on it. You could probably spot and spray those out.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation, and
because I'm standing here and I'm thinking, okay, is there a way where like you can get natural black grasses to compete? But that stuff is just so
Well,
resilient.
diversity in plants, diversity in animals. There wasn't one animal out there eating everything.
right.
You gotta think of all those animals that were on this prairie that were consuming those plants.
A buffalo doesn't choose the
Well,
same stuff as
like
a
this
pronghorn
stuff did
antelope
come from
as
this country.
Right,
So that's
but
the problem.
I had a neighbor, I bought his place and he had that as an ornamental on his house.
I hate
I
this.
turned my sheep in there and they ate it all and it never came back.
Wow. Maybe I need to get some cheese.
That was my first thought, is there
So-
something that?
Yeah.
So, but those might be pretty established if they're pretty deep down. These were.
In the interest of time as well as the temperature, I better keep going describing what we've got here, then I'll turn the water on and we'll go back to the table skirt over there. So this was, if I remember right, got 11 or 12 species mix that was planted in here. Obviously we have mostly oats and some clover, but all of those things did germinate and grow. It's just that this is getting to be almost a year old and I need to plant a new one and start fresh again because they're
any of
Oh,
all
those-
annuals.
Perennial, or any of those?
All of
coming
those
back on the
are
road?
annual.
Yeah.
Yep. And it would fit in like the situation that Dave discussed on a crop field, where they're meant to serve a purpose for a certain amount of time, and then the cash crop is going to be planted. There's opportunity here in the form of grazing value, but it's not the main purpose of that field. Here, healthy, warm season dominated rangeland. Here, long-term, heavy grazing, degraded rangeland, to the point where there's this much bare ground. Now, this might be pushing on the extreme of how good ground cover looks. This too, because if it was grazed, it would be, about half as tall. But it speaks to the points here is that we don't see bare soil in either one of these. And that's one of our 5 principles of soil health.
Nature doesn't want exposed soil.
So, hopefully you don't have to move away. The wind is light.
Looks like you gotta get it over that way a little
Got
bit
it.
more. So
Okay.
maybe even turn the stem. There you go.
That
Yeah.
might work. Air in the hose. Still reaching that? Not over here. Nope.
Quite getting everywhere.
Did you take this up by yourself, or did you find
There
it
we
in a
go.
book somewhere?
This contraption?
Yeah.
Oh, some NRCS guys figured this out. That was 20 years ago or so.
Yep, some colleagues of mine, I think in Kansas, an agronomist, really wanted a way to demonstrate what was happening in fields to his customers.
Well, this is a pretty good range. Hands can talk about it.
Yep, it doesn't look like much because the wind's not blowing and there's not lightning and thunder cracking, but in the span of probably 7 or 8 minutes, we're going to apply 2 to 3 inches of rain on these
That's
trees.
quite a down.
Yeah. We think an inch an hour is a lot. So, what things do you notice almost immediately? Every time that fan of water comes over on this side, what's happening with this tray?
Holding the water on top.
Okay, you're seeing water pool at the bottom. How about look at this whiteboard? Every time that raindrop hits, what happens?
This side too.
Yep. Yeah, even over
Oh,
there
yeah.
on undisturbed rangeland, but it's been grazed so heavily.
Those raindrops are torpedoes. And they have weight to them, and when they hit, they destroy things, they destroy the soil, and then they also cap it.
Yeah, now it's
Yeah, and now we've had enough rain.
Oh, yeah, you can really see it eroding.
And our prairie too.
Trying to see just how much water is actually in that rain gauge already, but it's,
Cover crop.
yeah, it's at best a half inch and it's already running off. Now, I checked, you know, how much is that slope? I made sure that it was the same on both sides, but I didn't pay attention to what the percent slope is. But it's not much.
Our prairies are gently sloping anyway. We don't have.
Yeah, this is a commonly farmed hillside. You can see, like Dave said, every time that fan of water comes over here, you've got soil particles being detached and splashed up there. But yet, the neighbor's field, that's been no-tilling for the last 20 plus years and has just plant cover on there, even though there's nothing growing, we don't have that happening, or it's very, very minimal, if it is.
It's retaining more water too.
Yep. So, the jars up front, the 5 that are closest to you are capturing runoff. The 5 jars behind them are capturing what infiltrates those trays. I did forget to grab one. You want to grab one of the trays, Dave, to show them?
Oh, yeah.
Out of the front of the trailer. So while that continues to run, I'm going to reference the bottom of the table skirt over here. So the principles of soil health that we've alluded to, that may fly in the face of conventional decision making for farming at least, but to a degree grazing as well, is to disturb the soil as little as possible. Tillage is not our friend. It is a tool that can be used for weed control, site preparation, things like that. Dave's holding up each one of those trays is just like that, with holes in the bottom, so that the water can get through. And then for infiltration's purposes, they're just set in a tray that has one drop point for infiltration. So, disturb the soil as little as possible, that makes sense. These principles are the result of understanding and studying healthy native rangelands and how they function, and then trying to apply them to more modified landscapes like our farm fields.
What is our most limiting factor to production in western South Dakota?
moisture.
Water. Even if you don't care about anything else, that alone ought to make you want to change your practice.
The second principle
You're gonna have to
is to keep the soil covered at all times. So, and we're seeing the impact of that with every wave of that rainfall simulator. Is those trees that have plant cover
I know.
have that soil protected, and we're not losing particles, degrading water quality, losing
How many
wildlife habitat,
farmers
killing
do you
fish.
show this to?
what
And
have
do
you.
But do they?
Third,
Is it enough
increased
to
diversity. We've said that term a number of times. We have diversity in our cover crop with the 10, 11 species. We have diversity on our native rangeland that's healthy.
Yeah, no, because this is.
This one, though, the diversity's fallen out
Overgrazing.
Yep, no,
because
this
of
is
grazing.
a.
Yep, we're typically, we open the gate in May or June, and we bring them home in October. And anything that is green and growing during that time and palatable is just grazed out of existence, year over year over year. So, let me preface this by saying you can graze heavily. You could take this down to the soil surface once every 5 or 10 years and really not hurt it that badly. There may be a risk of some erosion if you get a big rainstorm or something right after that, but it will recover and be okay because we have healthy, robust root systems supported by healthy soil under there.
So if you had a year that was really dry, you didn't have enough feed, it would be okay to feed it overly
Look
grazed
at
a little
the
bit.
one that's hitting the groundwater
Yeah,
basket.
you wouldn't want to do that 2 years in a row.
So here's an example though that's counter to that. That soil there that's got the straw on it, I take 5 tons of hay off of it every year and I put it to the top. I do that 4 times. And I've gone from 4.2% organic matter to 7 during that time. 6 years. That soil is overperforming because it's creating this huge canopy of solar panels.
You need to get yourself another gallon.
Now it's time to
And so you can, if your soil's alive, you can challenge it because all that surface area of leaf there, that is taking energy from the sun and putting it right into your soil. And guess who loves all that carbon? All of us carbon-based animals need carbon to consume. The plants share all that with the biology in the soil. They trade it. The plant wants something from it. And those microorganisms will multiply, and in some cases they found the plant root hairs will actually absorb the microorganism and consume it for what it has in it, for like zinc or molybdenum or whatever element it needs, and it spits the rest back out. We don't give plants enough credit. You think of them as pretty simple organisms compared to the fauna side of biology.
Well, I understand about it's like we have to care about all the plants. We have to care about them because we're taken from them.
But they'll
give-
provide us.
We have to
if we,
give back.
They will provide us and take care of us like nothing else if you get that biology. It's all about energy flow. Where are we getting our energy from? Sun. And as long as we can capture that and sequester it into the soil, those plants will give it back tenfold. But to get people to see that as a whole system of living things that are going on there.
Do you see your professors down at Brookings in the Ag College
Bonnie's
adopting?
got good
Do you see them changing a little bit their approach?
A little
It
bit.
is amazing. There is two sides of that. There's some that kind of like the farmers. They're just not going to go there. They're about that. But the ones that are the young guns and some of them that have been at this for 30 or 40 years.
But see, 30 and 40 years is such a short time.
Exactly.
And if they have to think about my grandson,
Well, yes.
grandson, what's he gonna have by the time he's
But they've told us it takes 1,000 years to build an inch of topsoil.
You can
We
see.
can do it in 5.
Yeah,
Just,
I understand.
it's,
So you can see the amount of infiltration that occurred in those 2 trays.
Oh my goodness.
now you tell me you should be out there farming that?
So
Alright, I gotta get a picture of that.
that is about 1.8 inches of rain in 10 minutes. So we had a little lower water pressure than I sometimes run, but it still got the volume.
We got the point.
Yeah.
Yep. And you may have noticed before I flipped it over that there were pebbles that you could see on that soil surface that weren't visible when we turned the water on, because that soil washed to the bottom of the slope and ended up in this jar. And that was my cue to turn off the rain, was because we were running off the full jar. You know, well, a little bit got by, but that was the stuff at the very edges here.
Right, yeah.
So if we left this alone for long enough, all the soil that ran off would be settled into the bottom of that jar.
And then is that what you call silt?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And silt can be windblown or water driven, but most of the time when we're thinking about it in aquatic environments, we think it's silted. It's just that slimy mud.
That's what's ended up in the Gulf of Mexico.
Creates the delta.
Our topsoil's going down there. That's any good.
So here's how much Dave's field actually ran off, and I'm not even sure that actually
Oh
happened.
my goodness.
So a full jar versus none. And here's your infiltration. And here's your infiltration on that side.
So in I irrigate, I have a center pivot on that. Well, you've got it water anyway. I don't have to get irrigate very well. Right? And the one I get on there, I get returned on.
there's something I'd like to discuss. Why do these 2 jars have color in them? Why is that water that came out clear? Some of it's going to be nutrient, yep. Some of it's going to be the soil hue, the water filtered down through that soil. So that's going to be part of it too. Dave talked about the fungal networks in the soil. I'm standing in the wrong spot again.
No, it's fine. My video is so messed up anyway, but we'll make it work. I'll have some fun editing.
But yeah, this is like a tea of the dead organisms. Those microbes have, usually most of them are very short lifespan type creatures. So they have to reproduce very readily, and as long as they have food, water, and shelter, they will reproduce rapidly. But again, in this environment, we don't have a whole lot of reproduction going on. We have just trying to survive.
Is that what they would call tannin then?
No, tannin is a tannins are in plants. What's the other? Lignin is what comes to mind, and that has to do with stem rigidness.
Okay, it's too complex for me.
Yes.
I just,
Yep.
yeah.
You got good questions, though, Bob.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're doing really well.
So I point that out simply because I don't want anyone to walk away thinking that colored water is bad.
No.
The soil is the filter for the groundwater that we all drink, and yeah, it has a little bit of color.
Well, some of those might be root exudates too.
Yes,
Sugar-
thank you. I hadn't gotten all the way there, but yeah. So Dave talked inside a little bit about how the plants and the soil biology are communicating and making deals all the time. I liken it to stopping at the coffee shop or the convenience store. I happen to really like Snickers bars. When I walk in that place, they expect me to hand them $1.50 or $2, and in return, I get that Snickers bar. We both leave the transaction happy. The same kind of transactions are happening between our plant roots and soil biology, is that nothing is free. And so, little microbe, you give me that particle of nitrogen or water that's beyond the reach of my roots, but courtesy of this mycorrhizal network or the microbe's actual mobility on its own in the air and water spaces of the soil, that occurs in the pore spaces like you identified inside. You give me that, I give you sugar or energy or carbon, all things attached there that supports your life cycle. That's what healthy
And
soil.
if that system's undisturbed, it has a reach that's enormous. So like in the sequoias, the redwood forest, they put radioisotopes on one side of the forest, and they found them on the other side. They're trading all the way through there. And you disturb or disrupt that, and you ruin the whole deal.
So
So they're pulling minerals up that you don't have to buy as far as fertilizer, and if you're cycling a lot of this residue back, then you've got a whole host of biology that's consuming that. Of what one is earthworms, and earthworms aren't necessarily native out here. There's a few little ones, but the big ones you find, those came in, and they'll turn over 25 earthworms in a square foot, 6 inches deep. You extrapolate that to an acre, that's 1 million earthworms. They'll turn over 20 tons of soil that goes through their system. 20 tons an acre. And it all becomes chelated. Chelated is immediately able to be taken up by the plant. So in your gardens, if you can get an earthworm deal going on in there, you've got everything in there already.
So is a worm a worm? Like if I
No,
go back-
there's so many species of them. Just like, but then again, nature's diversity.
But for my garden box, is
Mm-hmm.
any worm okay? Is any worm good? Do I just go buy fishing worms?
Yes.
and
The
turn
only
them
thing I
loose?
tell you is this: what they've learned in eastern United States, where they've managed forests really well, earthworms have moved in and changed the ecosystem. They're not native, and so they're making the soil better. And guess what comes with that? non-native plants. And so our soil out here was integrated and recycled with dung beetles. And that's our soil rejuvenator on the prairies. And now you got all these ranchers capturing dung beetles to see what they've got for species.
I think SDSU's identified, was it 17 species native to South Dakota?
Yes.
Of beetles?
Of
dung
dung
beetles.
beetles.
Dung,
They
not
eat
just
manure.
beetles,
Yeah.
dung beetles.
And they fly. They'll follow the cow. And they use dung different ways, but a lot of them take it, they're burrowers, and they bring it down into the soil profile. And they feed the biology.
Good for them.
Yep.
And 70% of what goes through a cow goes out the other end. So that's your manure spreader.
So how do I bring it home though? Because my farmer died 3 years ago. The farm is gone. I got my house, my yard, and my garden boxes. How do I take this and bring it home? Do I just go buy fish and worms and throw them in my garden box, or do I need to?
You know, in your garden, see, like in my fields, they came. I didn't put any in there. They came from when I was a kid, and Bonnie knows where I grew up. So we tilled everything, and you didn't have worms out in your cropland. When you went to find worms for fishing, you went to tree belts or in where leaves were, and then you'd have that, and that's where you'd find big worms. Now you can spade into my soils, and you'll bring up every worm you want to go fishing with. And those holes that you saw in those soils, that's from them.
But you know, I noticed in my yard that there used to be a lot of worms. You know, when I was a kid, there were a lot of worms. I don't have a lot of worms in my yard. So how do I mean, I know how to get them in. I can put them in my garden box. That dirt's soft, and you know, they'll hide and they'll be okay. But in my yard, what do I do? How do I get them in my yard without them just drying up and blowing away?
So, in eastern South Dakota, the night crawlers do well in lawns. And so I'm just starting
That's your fishing worm that you go by. Yeah.
I'm just starting to learn about worms.
Do they make it lumpy and bumpy though? I mean, I thought night
You know-
crawlers made lawns.
They're gonna spit out castings, which is what you want.
See, my mom's yard
But
had worms, and it seems to still have worms, but my house doesn't have worms.
here's another idea for you too, is how low are you mowing? And a lot of people, again, just like grazing,
I mow deep.
well, that's
I mow deep.
this is you.
I mean, no,
serious.
I don't mow it short. I mow it long.
Oh,
Yeah, you should leave it
Because
long.
I went round and round with Dave Smith because I said, you know, your ordinance says 6 inches. I mow it at 6 inches, so if I start at the front, I'm in trouble before I get the back done.
So you
It
may
takes me
be
2
building
days.
you may be building too much thatch. What bluegrass does to keep everything else out is it creates a thatch layer. And that's where Tanse kind of touched on it. To go in and intensively graze something, but not every time, actually stimulates the soil too. So if you went in there, even like now, and took a good cleaning out, because are you watering it, or is it just getting rainfall?
I don't water much. I water sometimes, and when I water to death because I don't get around to it very often, but I don't water it until it's looking bad. 'Cause
You live in town here?
Yeah.
The other thing that could be playing a part on this worm population thing is what's underneath of what you see when you
Yeah.
dig a shallow hole. You could be laid on top of rock or really dense clay, and they don't have the depth
It's
to have
red.
habitat.
When they dug my
Oh,
sewer,
you're in the
it
red
was-
bed there.
it was red.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it might not be the most hospitable environment for an earthworm.
You need to get some cows and some dung beetles.
There you go.
Or
And some fences.
You could get
or
a
chickens
miniature
and
cow.
honeybees or
miniature-
whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Chickens do a great job too. You can make them little chicken tractors and move them around your yard. Have you heard of them?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you just build a little cage and get it on 2 wheels, and every day you move them to a different spot. And all that's all that dropping is going right there, and chicken manure is pretty hard to beat.
Well, then I don't have to worry about anything eating them because
Right.
I have them.
Yeah,
And then
they're
they
captured
eat all
already.
those insects that are in there.
And we can have chickens again now. We couldn't. before.
Yeah, they just passed the
can
ordinance
only
not
have
too
them.
long ago that we can have chickens
Yeah.
again in our yard
So-
here. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I should, in the interest of time, because I want Dave to be able to deliver the presentation that he built to you guys, because it's going to tie all this together, I
Okay,
think,
good.
historically and as well as what we were showing here as far as a modern vision for an adaptive, holistic, if you will, agricultural method.
So
5 principles of soil health. I have got these 5 pinwheels here. Some of them have been modified. And so starting from a conventional field or an overgrazed pasture, we apply one of those principles. Let's say we're just not going to till anymore. I'm going to become a no-till gardener. I'm going to become a no-till farmer. When the wind blows, our one principle of soil health, it'll go around, but it's not very efficient, right? Okay? Because everything works in cycles, and Dave said it compounds on one another. We need one before we can have the other types of thing. All right, so you've convinced me I'm not going to till anymore, and I'm going to make sure that I keep cover on any exposed soil. So now I've got 2 principles of soil health, and with a little wind, this goes pretty good. That one, it's almost like you got a rock in your sock type of situation. Okay, so 2 of them is good. But there are 5. All right, so going to improve diversity. In the gardening situation, I'm sure you already do this, but you rotate what you grow in each location in the garden box from one year to the next. You don't grow pumpkins in the same spot every single year, or sweet corn or potatoes. You move that around. That would be what we call in farming crop rotation, right? We're not going to grow the same thing in the same spot year after year after year. Okay? So now we've got 3 principles, and with a little bit of wind and somebody who's full of air more than me, it moves along pretty readily. And it's going to take a lot less wind to make that work better than where you started, right? Come on, stick in there.
Now
There
I'm
we
in
go.
serious trouble because I grow beets and only beets in the
Oh.
same box.
There are some crops that are a little bit more intensive resource users than others, and your tubers, the beets, the potatoes, there's a high degree of disturbance involved there inherently. The way, if you wanted to improve that spot, that soil, without these chemical amendments or fertilizer amendments or what have you, tillage and all of the inputs, then it means really you maybe only grow beets in that spot once out of 5 years or something like that. That's how they grow field scale potatoes in North
Yeah,
Dakota.
you
I'm
can't.
getting 2 boxes this year, so.
Disease is
Yeah.
just, when you start camping on the same spot, disease is gonna build up.
Yep. Probably more important, well, I shouldn't say it that way, but as important of any of the principles, having cover and having zero disturbance or as little disturbance as possible, is having that living root in the soil for as much of the year as possible. Northern Great Plains, we do have that, what we call the dormant period in winter, right? But Dave said it, and he's right. Those deals, those trades are still occurring even under snow, under frost cover. It's happening less, but it's happening. And so here we've got that 4th principle is that after a crop that's maybe harvested in July or early August, I'm going to put something out there so that I don't just deal with weeds. I want something that provides me value. And that value could be as simple as just feeding soil biology. Now, just the lightest gust really, really works to make that cycle go around. And if we adopt all 5 principles on the same acre all the time, year over year over year, we start to see the compounding effects just like Dave's seeing in his fields. And that's the incorporation of livestock. And when we say livestock, we obviously know you're not going to put a hog or a sheep in your raised bed garden. But that doesn't mean that you might...
You can do chickens.
You could do chickens, you could do honeybees, you could also connect with somebody like Dave or myself who has ready access to some manure in a dry lot and bring the manure to your garden. You won't have all the effects, but you'll have many of them. Now keep in mind that what that animal has been treated with and fed comes out the backside too, so you kind of want to know the source of your manure. Just like if you buy straw for gardening, it would be good to know if that had been treated with any herbicides or anything that might be on that residue. That was one of our issues when we did a no-till garden, is that I got straw that must have had a chemical treatment not that long before harvest. And our grassy type crops like our corn and onions worked okay. Our peas and beans did not like that. In fact, they greened up, they grew a little bit, and then they just stopped. They never even produced fruit. There must have been something in that straw, because we didn't do anything to the soil other than scalp the grass off the plant. So, but with all 5 principles, it takes just almost nothing, and that soil's on the path to regeneration.
My aha, because I know Bonnie and Diana grew up out in the prairie, and you abuse that range and you're done. You are out of business. And so you think of it that way, that you always take half of the production, you leave half to go back to the soil. So we have to, how do we do that with cropland? And that's what we have to keep in mind. And then, yeah, the diversity of the plant community in the rangeland, we got to have that either in crop rotations or in cover crops and multi-species. And we touched on that again. 3 years of putting those practices in will turn that around. It is not as slow as we've been led to believe. Making topsoil is kind of a term you can get into the weeds on. We're making organic matter, which some of that organic matter, because of biology, will become mineral attached organic matter, which is what we would define as true topsoil, as scientists would call it. And that takes a while, but biology will speed that up. Organic matter, we can jump organic matter, and perennials are a big part of that solution, because it's, again, going back to native prairies, are mainly perennial based. There's some biennials and some annuals, but and then just look at the color in those two. It just anyway.
When you buy topsoil in a bag, are you really getting topsoil, or you're just?
That's a good question. I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. You're probably just getting a composted mix of something.
I got a pallet full of it.
Yeah, well, you'll find out. But here's an interesting thing. So 1% of topsoil is 20 tons of carbon. So we know that we have that as an environmental issue, right? 1%. I've moved that field, that soil you saw, from 4.2, this year it was 7. And I'm producing at a high production level that's serving me. The energy flow from the sun into the soil, that, I talked to the soil scientist that's world renowned, and it's counterintuitive, because I've always been told if you take all that biomass away, you're taking all that from the soil. And she said, well, yeah, that's correct, but she said, your soils are functioning at such a level. And think of it, another way to think of it, when you're in shape physically, you don't need as much food to do the same thing as when you're out of shape and trying to do something. And that's the way the soil is too. If you've got that thing in shape, it will overperform, and so I'm sequestering carbon like no other. The other thing about organic matter is 1% organic matter will hold 1 inch of water per acre. And from an irrigator point of view, that's huge. So if I've got 7% organic matter, I can hold 7 inches worth of water. I can raise a crop on that. a hay crop on, 7 inches of water, easy, without having to irrigate. Or irrigate less, which again is another savings.
Yeah.
There. It just, from a farming point of view, you're looking at ways to minimize input costs. And it's just incredible. So then you've got all that carbon in there, and guess what the biology does? It just keeps exponentiating in weight. So those worms are turning over all that for me. That's a huge part of that. And then the biology's eating that. Whoops, I jumped ahead too far. And we have to, we're trying to look at those things, what we're up against. Our carrying capacity as a world is going to get challenged here. We're going to be over 9 billion people, by 2050. That's not that far away. And any rancher knows about carrying capacity. You put too many cows out there, well then, there's no food and they start to fight. Well, guess what's going to happen to us if we don't get this figured out? And that goes back to ancient times. That, when agriculture and food, and in Africa, they still struggle with that. I mean, there's over 1 million people starving to death in the world every day. That shouldn't be. So we look at how much farmland we're losing because we're putting, asphalt on it or whatever, and we see this, there's those worms. It's just, these guys are doing all that tilling for us. We do not have to sit in a tractor and buy diesel fuel to do that. And this is some of this forage winter wheat that we raise as a feed crop, but we also combine it, and you can see how tall that is. It's almost 4 feet tall. And we cut that at 2 feet when we combine it. And so we're leaving 2 feet of stubble. And then we bale it, and we make straw, and we use that straw, and then it'll end up back out there. But 2 feet of stubble, one inch is 250 pounds of biomass. So even 20 inches then, I'm at 5,000 pounds of biomass, 2.5 ton that I'm putting back to the ground. And it's keeping it covered. It's not getting exposed to those elements. Your production costs we touched on. You're protecting your natural resources, air, water, wildlife, just go through them all by doing that. And we can, like you saw, healthy soils reduce nutrient loading and sediment runoff. Well, I don't know how you argue with what you saw out there. I mean, that's that black one. Why we're not changing, I don't get
So is FSA in on helping people? Because part of the reason why people overgraze and overdo is because they have a bank payment they gotta make.
Correct. You're exactly right. And some of those supports that they put in to help ranchers during droughts are not rewarding good behavior.
Yeah.
Right. That's the honest truth. And I had to write, when I was in extension, I had to write reports about the difference between a normal production year and a drought year in different counties. And a lot of it was man-caused. You create your own drought because you took more than half. You took more than half, then you took more, you're taking organic matter away, so you're not holding as much moisture. You took stubble away. If you're grazing it from here down to here instead of here, a lot of our snow catch is huge in keeping the soil insulated from losing moisture, let alone adding to it.
Because I think that if you could probably say all farmers and ranchers, they all want to have a healthy land base.
Yes,
but a lot of it, most of the time why they don't want to change is because they can't afford it.
We put ourselves in positions
their prices are from the 1940s, but
Yes.
production costs are going up all the
Correct.
time.
We have no
And that's
control
why
over
I'm
price.
hoping that if
but-
FSA could help us
Well,
to,
they do
try
through
to-
the form of the NRCS, like Tanse, in the programs they have. They
Uh-huh.
will incentivize you to put in grazing systems and to do all the things that we just talked about. They will incentivize that in cost shares to change your practices. And a lot of ranchers are doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Bonnie and Diana can talk about that too. I mean, you just know that anybody that was overgrazing wasn't gonna be there very long.
Yeah, you know, we think
Just
about our dad,
cannot
he just
see.
naturally knew.
Well, he knew, I've overgrazed, and I've paid for in, production the next years.
yeah,
Very seldom.
it's a snowball.
It is,
That's what
it is, and we're not, in eastern South Dakota, they get 25 inches of rain. We get 15. And half of that, more than half of that comes in April, May, June. So what's worrying me right now, we're halfway into April, and the forecast isn't showing a lot of rain. And last year we got saved because we had this little 2-3 week window at the end of May, June, it stayed cool and we got moisture. And we
I
grew
always
grass.
have this rule in the last 10 years is that I'm not gonna worry about a drought until the end of June.
That's right.
Because I know that a lot of rain can come.
That's correct. April, May, June, or in this country is when everything's made. I was always taught, you don't go out to your natives until June. Because what you're gonna have the 1st of June is what you're gonna have for the rest of the year. And sometimes they get more after that, but otherwise I was staying on my non-natives, my crested weeds and my alfalfa fields and that stuff and just camping on that, but we've talked about a bunch of this, and I touched on holding that water. That's a huge part. Every inch of water we can hold is gonna serve us out here. It's gonna keep the soil alive, it's gonna keep everything functioning. And even though you might not grow much, those plants, like western wheatgrass, which is what made this country, it's native, it's here for a reason, all those thousands of years, buffalo on it, antelope on it, it's the one that's here because it fits this environment. And you can determine how much grass you're gonna have next summer based on how much rain you had in October, in November, in December. Because it's what we're talking about. Those plants are sitting there going, okay, I'm going into winter, I don't got a lot of moisture, so western wheatgrass will grow this tall every year. But in wet years, the grasses will be this far apart. In dry years, they'll be this far apart. So it may look like you've got a lot of grass out there until you walk out and look down and they're spaced. Plants are just uncanny on their ability to figure it out. And it's all that deal making that's going on and it's moisture driven. And comparing these two, and this wasn't my doing, this is Gabe Brown's up in Bismarck, and some of you might know him. That's the difference in what you can do when you work on these principles. And so what is our future going to be? We're going to move back to the way man had to do it when they started out. You've got to live within nature. The Native Americans knew it. They had to teach us how to do it because those settlements almost starved to death. They didn't know how to feed themselves. And the Native Americans have one system, not all the tribes, but a lot of them. Have you heard of the Three Sisters? The Three Sisters are you plant pumpkins, corn, and beans together. Same mound. Pumpkins cover the ground and keep the weeds out. Corn's the grass, and it's going to make that corn, right? But what does grass love for nutrient? Nitrogen. And who's making the nitrogen? The beans. They had that figured out 1,000 years ago. You're working within nature. And why are we fighting it? And again, I don't want to villainize what farmers are doing now. It was what we knew to do and how we brought it along, but it's not going to last. It's not going to last for my kids or my grandkids, just from a profitability, survivability point of view, let alone an environmental point.
Well, what they did in this country, it was fairly new because, like I'm thinking back in Europe, they probably had smaller farms, so they plowed it.
Yeah,
And
we
then
don't
they
have
come
enough
over
time to talk
here
about that.
and they have just acres
They
and
just
acres.
spoiled those soils.
So they just
And
plowed
they're
it all.
still doing it in some spots. Around those castles and those fiefdoms, the aristocracy controlled the farmers.
Yeah.
They were serfs, and the farmers owned nothing, and everything they raised went to the, and then they metered back out, and they just despoiled those soils, and just, some of them, they still haven't recovered around there. And then, yes, then they come here, and you've got these untouched, pristine soils, and we're despoiling them again. We're just, and it's all washing down, washing away. And we can change it, nature is forgiving, that's the beauty thing. And that's another thing that really warms my heart is we can turn this around. I can do it on my place. If nobody else is gonna do it, I'm gonna do it on my place. And what's interesting then is the feed that I'm feeding my livestock is higher nutrition levels. I don't need as much mineral. We don't have to, sheep are notorious for getting worms. The way we rotate, I don't have to use parasitides. And it's just all those things go away. And then guess what? You're happier. And you're not taking your stress out on your family. They're happier. And then that whole thing, that's that holistic deal. It's just.
And your
Was
sheep
I
are
happy?
happier.
What's that?
Your sheep are happier.
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Healthy
big
sheep.
worms and you don't have to
They're
run.
more nutrient dense in their meat composition.
Yeah.
And so, and I had to learn all this the hard way. I had to go through all the conventional thoughts and do it all those ways, and it wasn't working for me, and it wasn't happy. And livestock are part of that deal, which a lot of people don't think about. So those are those 5 things again. Oops. And it's just thinking about nature. And we don't have to know it all. We just have to mimic what was here. It is silly to be raising corn out here. This is not tall, warm season grass country. This is short grass prairie. So let's raise short grasses, cool seasons. Use your wheats and your barleys and your oats. You can put your sorghums in if you've got, because they're set up for some of that. But we are not sustainable raising corn out here. It is just a silly idea to do that. It is. It just doesn't fit our environment.
What about beans?
Beans,
Soybeans?
they don't fit here. They're cool. They're not. They've been bred so different, but you can put them in my cover crops, one of the best ones that graze well are soybeans. So when I do a cover crop, I think of 80% of it is going to be grass, just like my prairie. And then 15% is going to be forbs, and 5% is going to be legumes, just like my prairie. And so one of a legume, soybeans. And I've grazed soybeans before, and livestock do well on it. So, and we're in infancy on this. We're, like I said, if we can put some money into understanding this, this country out here has been called an economic burden to our nation because we have to have so many government supports. If we could sequester that carbon like I know we could be a GDP, a gross domestic product driver out here. We can flip that thing around and we can be strength to this country. And so, yeah, less energy is used, more drought tolerance, reduced disease, improved sustainability, improved plant health, which then goes to the animals, which then goes to us. So we should have less issues with human health. I don't know why some people fight that so bad, other than, you know, to be kind of ornery is, it's money driven. Corporate America and ag businesses are in business to make money. And how do they do that? They sell fertilizer, they sell chemicals. But they're changing, some of them are, they're moving some of these ways. This blows my mind, and I still have a hard time believing it, and I keep asking them, and it's 1,700 insect species for every one pest. That will eat that one pest. So when we go back to our weed steal and some of those things, we can combat that naturally.
What's in that picture?
Those are spider webs.
Sure, spider webs.
That shows
First I thought they were
rangeland health.
sage-grouse.
I have a picture in another presentation. My alfalfa field looks like that in the fall. So I'm saying, I've got
Spiders
spiders in my field, and what's that telling you? There's also, I've found out that earthworms exude an enzyme that alfalfa takes up that keeps weevils away. I got spiders eating weevils, earthworms keeping weevils away. I don't have to use chemicals. And so again, minimal disturbance, we can do it. That's the way our fields look. We armor the soil. We showed you that. That's what happens when you don't keep the soil covered. You're just exploding that. This one we didn't talk about, but it's huge. What temperature do you like it in your house? 70, 80 degrees? My mom loves 80.
That happens when you get older
Yeah,
sometimes.
I think so. That's the same temperatures we like is what the soil likes. Is that an accident? That's ideal living. When you go over 100, they start dying. You get in bare soil in the middle of summer, 140, you killed them all. You just you cooked them, bare soil. What are we doing? What are we doing? It's just, you know, that shows you that deal. You just that alone will tell you to keep it covered. Keep the direct sunlight off that soil. We saw it on the water, but yet we've been conditioned, and it was the best thing at that time for what we knew. So, you know, I don't want to beat anybody up. I tilled too. And those are cover crops coming back into that. And then you can graze that. And so then again, less feed that you have to put in the bale, less diesel you have to run through your tractor.
So the green is planted intentionally?
Yes. Those are cover crops, right? As soon as you can, we'll do it. If I got somebody to run the drill when I'm combining, that's what's gonna happen.
Right behind you.
So you don't lose any moisture. And it only takes a quarter inch and that stuff's coming. Because all that stubble and all that organic matter is holding that right there, and that's all it needs to get started. And then it's just unbelievable. But then diversity. The monocultures just cause us problems because the insects figure it out. And then livestock. Again, enzymes in their saliva will stimulate plants to start again. And every time you mow or you graze, the root hairs that supported that foliage on top, they die. Well, what do they become? Carbon. And then it uses energy to put out new root hairs. It makes new deals, and it just keeps going. And that's where you get that overperforming deal, is because of that. And diversity in livestock. Cows eat grass. Sheep and goats love forbs and woodies. And they'll both eat a little bit of the other, but why is 80% of the prairie grass? Because the biggest animal on the prairie was a buffalo, and guess what he needed to eat? A lot. And then you had your deer and your antelope. Well, we're just mimicking nature by using different species. And there's our dung beetle friends. And that's a whole new thing too. I mean, you can build these little pop bottle traps and catch them and then identify them. It's great kid stuff. It just, yeah. So I won't get into all that, but it's a lot of what I said. We're just reducing input costs. We're making predictable outcomes that we can go to our banker and tell them this is, yeah, we can do that. And then this is all that extra stuff besides surviving as a rancher. We are going to be a solution to a lot of our environmental problems if we can get worldwide on board on this. We can pull, if everybody grazed an area the size of Australia in what we call a pulse grazing, where we're saying you're going in and you're hitting it, and you're taking a little less than half and you're leaving more leaf, we can sequester all the carbon emitted by that occurred since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. We have that power to do that, and it's just coming. More and more people are getting it now. But that, you know, at the end of it, that's the quality of life. If we have that, we can have a greater carrying capacity. So for me, it's just, that's what I want my kids. I want them to live like this.
Yeah, because it's an answer to like endangered species too.
Yes, yeah.
There's some hope to
We
see.
have, World Wildlife Fund came out and did a survey, a bird survey on our place. There was 13 species that are threatened that are on our place, they found. Either they identify it as a threat or the South Dakota Game Fishing Parks. 13 birds. And I wasn't trying to do that. That's how nature recovers. It's just amazing. So that's kind of where we're at with all this stuff. That's my youngest when he was little, but that's a rapeseed, that plant is, the cousin to canola. But you can just see that old gnarly root, that's what I like. That's my soil conditioner, that's my plow or my shovel. And then that dies, and then it goes back to the soil. And the sheep eat the top part. That becomes red meat. So, any questions?
So what would, it seems like the big thing now is aquaponic and that kind of, I mean, how do you see that kind of farming or whatever?
Hydroponics and aquaponics is not gonna improve anything. And it's probably, a lot of those systems don't have the nutrient density in their foodstuffs either. Some of those are, they thought were solutions because of loss of farmland, and in like Japan, that's big. because of, you know, they just don't have the farm ground and they're dependent, so they're trying to do it that way. It's a stopgap, I'd say that, but it's.
I often think that it takes, you gotta be pumping water,
Well,
which is energy.
yes, you gotta go back to energy, that's what I was gonna say. Energy is your question mark. And where does that come from? That comes from the sun. So what can you do to capture that energy from the sun and put it into the soil and then bring it back out as you need it? That's what people gotta do, that's what they gotta get to. We are energy collectors. So it's just changing that paradigm of what that agriculture is.
What were you gonna ask, Diana?
Well, did some of the information get gleaned from what they were first learning about how bison graze the prairie? I mean, is that kind of the start of
Yeah.
this thinking?
Some of it, there's a whole bunch of different people that have come to this in different directions. But for us, the gold standard to measure whether you've arrived in soil health is against the native prairie. That's why Tanse was showing you that. That's the gold standard. And you can make your cropland function like that. It's not the same, but it's a lot closer than anything else we're doing. But yes, they look back at, you know, all those things, Lewis and Clark and Audubon and any of those people and what they wrote about. You know, you hear the stories of how right in eastern South Dakota and the Indian grass and big blue stem was as tall as a horse's back. And, well, those are warm seasons, and you can mimic that with corn, but corn's an annual. Perennials are your real answer. They are just powerhouses for putting things back to the soil. Yeah, no, there's a Japanese guy, and he did this in the early 1900s, Fukado Musunabu, I'm killing his name. He just made a whole closed system of this, and again, he was leading that. That's in the early 1900s, and he wrote a book about it. And this whole system. You know, Alan Savory, you probably heard about him and the stuff he's doing. There's a guy down in Mexico, Alejandro Camarillo, I'm horrible on these names. He's just taken a desert ranch and he's got grasses tall in a 6-inch rainfall. It works. And so those guys are brash enough to go out there and really put these things to the test. Just incredible. So there is a future to our environment and to our world, and all is not lost by any means. We can turn this around. Yeah, and there's a lot of excited people doing it. Now, Tanse he'll be coming back in, I think, but this lake test, I won't hold you, but the point of this is to see how the dissolvedness went to particle, and if you come up here, you can still see very small particles dissolving. And this one, you had that initial, but now you won't see that. That's stabilized soil. That's glued together with biology. And that's
Worms fit.
yeah, worm, slime, yeah. And you look at this stuff, we had a film shoot this summer, and I hayed this field, and then we had that June 11th storm, and it pounded the ground. But where I hadn't hayed, or where I had a windrow, you could spade worms, and where it had been hailed on, there wasn't a worm one in that soil. They moved that fast. That was within about 3-4 days.
The worms would move away from
Bare
the
ground.
hail.
They went to wherever there was alfalfa standing, or where there was a windrow, you could spade worms. And where there wasn't, they weren't there. Yeah, and they moved that fast. It's just amazing. So you can, in this soil, you can just see all those pores, and that's the way that is at home.
I had never heard that they leave the worms. leave behind this kind of bluey substance.
Yeah,
that
that's part of
was
the,
helpful.
yeah, they emit, but again, they got the moisture too, to do it. Everything's dependent on moisture, and so you have organic matter to hold moisture, and that helps. And then the biology works, and then that also keeps that temperature deal steady.
So is there anything good about a slug?
No.
All right.
Then
Then I am vindicated. It's okay that I'm.
yes, you just go and sprinkle a bunch of salt on them and shrink them up.
Yeah, salt and beer.
Yeah. Yeah, they're opportunists too. Something's out of whack when they're coming, that's too much moisture that's not, or soil that's not aerated. You just,
That's my yard.
Well, David, I just think all this is so fascinating. It's like it's something everybody should have always known.
Well, I'm
Isn't it?
thankful the ranchers, the good ranchers, are doing this because this is how you ranch.
Well, a lot of it, I mean, like we speak of our dad didn't know any scientific
No.
approach, but it was experience.
Yes, yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah,
I'd say it's
absolutely.
We
experience.
rotated pastures,
Yeah.
we never overgrazed. I mean, I just
Those
think
guys knew that, and it's, yeah, that's.
he had both sheep and cattle.
Mm-hmm,
You
yeah,
know,
they were doing it
and-
because they needed,
To get it turned on.
they figured it out how to make a living without destroying the thing that was making the living. And it's a rangeland. Yeah,
Amazing.
so, yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, well,